We are back, and we are joined now by Katie Way, writer and editor at Hellgate, who covers issues here in New York City, including Katie was just at the closing arguments in the Daniel Penny trial for killing Jordan Neely. Katie, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
So, as I just mentioned, you were present at the closing arguments. Obviously, we do know that he was not convicted, Daniel Penny. He just recorded an interview with Janine Pirro for Fox News that I'm sure will enrage us all, but he's off, and no justice really for Jordan Neely. But what did you observe when you were in the courtroom, some of those closing arguments, and how those arguments were made?
Sure. Yeah. So the closing arguments, that's effectively just going over, both on the prosecution and the defense side, the evidence that they sort of most want the jury to consider. The trial went on over the course of a month or so. So that's a ton of witnesses, a ton of evidence, both like medical evidence. There's testimony from Daniel Penny's instructor in the Marine Corps and martial arts. There are people talking about the kind of person Daniel Penny is. So, it's a lot to consider. And this was the moment for the prosecution and defense to bring their respective arguments home. And so what we saw from the prosecution was a lot of medical evidence, specifically pointing to death by, as the Emmy ruled, asphyxiation chokehold. So that's stuff like blood clotting in autopsy photos of blood clots underneath Jordan Neely's eyelids and in the musculature of his neck. Stills from videos that people took of the two of them on the ground, where you can see the color changing in Jordan Neely's face, really graphic stuff like that. And then the other thing that the prosecution really highlighted was Penny's behavior, both in the immediate aftermath of their altercation and in a interview with the police, where he did not know that Jordan Neely was dead, but he also did not ask how Jordan Neely was. This man, he just spent 6 minutes choking on the floor of the F train. He did not express any remorse for what he had to do. He called Jordan Neely a crackhead multiple times, I think 5 different times during the interview. So that was what the prosecution kind of put in front of the jury. And then on the defense side of the equation, there were arguments that it was not actually a chokehold, that's not what killed Jordan Neely at all, that it was a combination of sickle cell trait that's present in 8 to 10% of the African American population, psychosis, caused by schizophrenia, and drug use, K2. And that is, I did another interview yesterday, and the interviewer pointed out that's something that, the cops have used similar reasoning, specifically with that sickle cell trait, saying that
Yes,
this person who, died
right.
in our custody, just a crazy coincidence,
Which we all know that, there's been some research into sickle cell, and it's not entirely clear, but it's not based on the color of one's skin, most likely. It's likely based on proximity to countries that may have had malaria, which could have contributed to it. But usually, as you're saying, it's used in a racialized way. And when it comes to the other defenses that you mentioned, I'm reminded of how those were unsuccessful in the trial of the killer of George Floyd, was the fact that he had used drugs or the fact that he was in poor health. In both of those instances, it's on video, the person's neck being constrained. So I'm confused as to why there were different outcomes here, even though obviously Penny is not a police officer. It doesn't necessarily matter if the person is in poor health or is more susceptible to dying because of pressure on their neck. In my view, obviously, at issue is the pressure on the neck.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think, in order to discount, like you said, video, and this is video that even in only my 2 days in court, we watched numerous times. We watched Jordan Neely die over and over. just in those 2 days in that courtroom. So I can only imagine how many times the jury saw it. I think that actually was probably the most, I have no insider information about this, but effective part of the defense's argument, which is that, it's very important in order to find Daniel Penny not innocent of a crime that you don't identify with Jordan Neely, that you identify with Daniel Penny, that you agree with the idea that Daniel Penny is a hero, and that you identify with the people who were on the train at the same time as both of them, who did, testify in court that they were scared that Jordan Neely was making threats and that they were afraid that he was going to, hurt someone. That's something that, like you mentioned, Daniel Penny reiterated in the, clip of the Fox News interview that's going around today, that he wouldn't have been able to live with himself if Jordan Neely had hurt someone on the train. And, it's like, well, you did.
I'm so glad no one got hurt that day.
I know. Exactly.
Yeah. It's crazy because you just see the dehumanization in real time. Because you know who was hurt that day? In fact, hurt in a fatal manner? The person who died, Jordan Neely. And you mentioned it briefly. It's in your piece in Hellgate, which I'd really encourage people to read, where you spoke. The defense seemed to be explicit about the politicization of what the defense was explicit in their claims that this prosecution was political in many ways, or you talked about how they verged into kind of like conspiracism about some of the evidence here. Can you give the audience some examples of what you heard from the defense on that front?
Yes. So, oh my God, again, I forgot about that as well. Yes. So the defense tried to argue, I don't even know if I can say tried because it works. They got what they wanted. But the defense argued that witnesses who arrived at the scene after the train had already stopped and cleared off, that they, one man, Eric Gonzalez, who had been holding Jordan Neely's arms, testified that he asked Daniel Penny to let go of his chokehold on Jordan Neely's neck, and that he had it under control. And another man tried to, I think, give Jordan Neely water, but said he was too intimidated by Daniel Penny. And the defense tried to claim that those witnesses were so intimidated by the political pressure exerted by protesters who wanted justice for Jordan Neely that they changed their testimony. They were so scared.
What evidence did they have that they changed their testimony?
Well, one, Eric Gonzalez actually did lie to the cops initially. He was in hiding.
That was the guy.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So, there's that. But on the other hand, I think a lot can be said about protesting in favor of justice for Jordan Neely. I can't, it just does not really gel with reality that is like such a potent political force in the city that you would lie in court in such a high profile case. I think that is a ridiculous argument. And the defense also argued that the medical examiners was pressured by her boss to put the cause of death as asphyxiation (parentheses chokehold), and that the boss had some kind of like political aspirations. I don't know. It felt very like tossed together and incoherent. But again, I don't. Not only am I not a lawyer, but it worked. Right? Exactly. So.
And I'm not sure you're at liberty to say this legally, so correct me if I'm wrong, but like, did you, the makeup of the jury, was that public in terms of like racial or racial identity or age or anything like that? Was there anything that was made clear about that?
Well, I know, it's Manhattan residents, 12 Manhattan residents. I don't, want to talk about individual jurors or anything like that. But I mean, what I will say is that they hired, Daniel Penny's defense team hired the same jury consultant that Kyle Rittenhouse's defense team did. So, I mean, I think that kind of, and you know what, they got their money's worth, it looks like. So,
of course.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't want you to do that. I just was curious if any, like, because sometimes they make public, the racial makeup of a jury, but I wasn't entirely clear in this case. But regardless, that says it all. That really does say it all here. And can you talk a little bit about the reaction that you've seen also in the wake of this, as somebody who covers politics in the city? You had a closing part of your latest piece about how Eric Adams flew off to some fancy retreat after this, and Daniel Penny got a beer, and Jordan Neely is dead. It's a crude summary of your writing. People should check it out, but that really does say it all, does it not? Is that there's a man dead, there's another guy on a media tour getting a beer, and the mayor is off on some luxury trip.
Right, exactly. And yeah, that was actually by colleague Max Rivlin Nadler. So I want to, or maybe it was Chris Robbins. I don't know. We're doing these anonymously. It gets a little confusing.
Sorry.
But no, all good. But yeah, right. Effectively, it is just, it feels like this is something that, especially the mayor, would love to, in a way, move on from, because he got what he wanted, I think in a lot of ways. And, he's made past statements that, effectively allude to that. A few weeks ago at a press conference, he said that Daniel Penny did what the city should have done. And he clarified, this week, that what he meant by what he said was protect the people, the passengers on the train. It's like, is Jordan Neely not a passenger on the train? He was riding the train. Like the acceptance of the premise that Jordan Neely is a threat that needed to be neutralized, was the threat that needed to be neutralized at, the highest levels of city leadership is insane. Yeah. And
his role in essentially not providing much at all, if at all, care for unhoused people in the city. He's been especially hawkish about undocumented migrants in shelters, and was kicking them out in a short period of time, a few months ago at this point. What has Eric Adams done, or what has he not done to contribute to the problem of unhoused people not being able to get care or be safe in any real way?
Yeah, I mean, I think Eric Adams has done, what he's done with a lot of problems in the city, and what he sort of explicitly promised from the jump he was going to do. He's thrown cops at the situation. I mean, throwing cops at the subways. Like, this is, I think he's made his orientation very clear, that instead of funding, shelters or other resources for homeless New Yorkers, instead of, creating these like robust programs that can, get people stable, he is funding, he wants to sweep the problem away. Like, people shouldn't be living on the subways. People shouldn't be, sleeping on the trains. It's like, people should not be creating disorder effectively. And it's like, I don't think there are too many people who are like, I'm loving this. This is an amazing situation. This is what I would pick to do.
Yes.
Right. Yes, exactly. So, yeah.
Right. It's a problem. And I do think that at least in the city, the Democratic representation in both with Kathy Hochul, who is deeply unpopular, and Eric Adams, who is under indictment and deeply unpopular, these centrist Democrats, I would argue that Eric Adams is pretty right wing. They, I think, have contributed to a mass frustration, really, with Democrats in these safe blue states, because it's so ossified, the institutionally, the Democrats there, that they don't behave in a way that Democrats would if they had, say, like a robust Republican opposition that may cause them to actually deliver for people.
Right, exactly. And you can feel that. You see that walking around, every day in the city. Like, if you want to talk about like, the scary New York City experience, like the scary New York City experience is that you can walk around and see immiseration. Like, you can see people suffering. Like, I'm not afraid that I'm seeing someone sleeping on the train, I feel sad that that's like the situation that they have to be in.
Agreed on that front. Well, really appreciate your time today, Katie Way. You can read Hellgate for all of this and other updates on the city. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.